Hey, this is Mike McAdam from Gen X Guitar. Did Sammy Hagar save Van Halen? This is going to be a hot topic, so hang around and we'll talk about it. So, it's 1984. Van Halen was already a really big band for years before that, but they were really primarily a guys band. I remember being in junior high school and the 1984 album came out and Van Halen hit a whole new level of stardom. Just suddenly people everywhere, guys, girls, were all into Van Halen. They were just kind of the all-everything band. I love the Chuck Klosterman quote where he says, if you just took the widest net and threw it out there, you would have Van Halen fans. But what's interesting is you have a mega album like 1984 was just everywhere that year. And like I said, they hit another level of popularity. But I wonder out loud whether Sammy Hagar joining the band in 85, 86 was able to help them sustain that. Hear me out for a second. So when grunge came out in 91, 92, there's this misnomer that suddenly every hair band and every rock band's career ended overnight. I don't think that was quite the case. I think it happened over a couple-year period. But suddenly, as that music became a lot more popular, the kind of frat boy, ultra macho, sexist 80s rock bands were seen as very passé. And as Kerry King says, a lot of those bands were the worst elements of Van Halen amplified. I think there's a lot of truth to that. But the point I'm making is by the time Sammy Hagar showed up for 5150, the songwriting changed, the music changed, the image was toned down a little bit, and I think Van Halen became more of, they became even more acceptable in a lot of ways. When you have a mega record like 1984, it allows you to put out virtually anything for your next release and have it be, at least on some level, well received. 5150 was a whole different type of record. Songwriting was different. The performances were different. Different types of songs, more commercial, you can say. But I also think it opened up a whole new playbook of things you had never heard Van Halen really do before. And I think it made it a little more interesting for people to listen to. By the time those edges had been dulled a little bit, Nirvana comes out. Like I said, all the grunge music comes out. And it allowed Van Halen to survive that blow. I have to wonder out loud whether if they had continued to do the kind of vaudeville frat boy kind of thing with David Lee Roth. If you look at David Lee Roth's career, 1990-91, suddenly, you know, Dave's got the thinning hairline, and it just suddenly looked really a little passé overnight because that kind of big rock was not in style at that moment. So that's my take. I think Sammy Hagar definitely prolonged the Van Halen career, put them in another dynamic, put them on another road. I'm not sure Van Halen would have continued to recycle 1984 and just have it work. I think they had probably reached the end with Roth as far as creatively how far they were going to go. And I have mixed feelings about the 1984 album. Part of me listens to it now and says, wow, you know, it's a really solid album. It's probably the best overall production of the Dave years. But the material on it, you know, it's definitely not as good as the first four records. There were some banger tunes on there, obviously. Hot for Teacher Panama, Jump was a whole other thing that opened up a different dynamic for them. But I don't think I get as much pleasure listening to it as much as the early albums. Like I said, Diver Down I kind of put in a different category. But so that's my take. Did Sammy Hagar save Van Halen, or at the very least prolong their career? I'm sure there's going to be some passion on both sides about this, so let's discuss in the comments section. So, you know, one of the points people will make is that Van Halen was actually more commercially successful with Hagar than Van Halen. I don't think that's really a good argument for saying the music was better. I think they had gradually built that up with Roth. And again, 1984 opened up a whole new audience, and I think 5150 and the later records capitalized on that. But I don't think that necessarily denotes one being better than the other. But yeah, there's no doubt Van Halen had huge commercial success with Hagar as their singer. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this content, please consider subscribing, liking our videos, and checking out more content here on Gen X Guitar.
What was your impression when Jump first came out?
I didn't really like it. I thought it was interesting, but naturally it was a departure from what they normally did, and maybe a little too synth poppy for me. But what was your take on it? Because you already a fan at that point?
I was disappointed as a guitar player at the time. I was young, but I was thrown off that Ed would dare to play keyboards instead of guitar.
It's funny. Ted Templeman still says he doesn't like the song. I mean, I'm sure it's bought some nice things for him, but I think he understands that it's a good song, but he's just not a fan of it. And I'm probably exactly in the same camp.
What's your least favorite song on 1984?
1984. Okay, so a weird thing happened with that album. There are tunes like Top Jimmy and Drop Dead Legs that I like a lot more now than I did at the time. I mean, they're still basically filler tunes, but I listen to them now and have more respect for them. Song I dislike the most, I'd have to say Jump, because the rest of it, I mean, there are songs like, okay, House of Pain, Girl Gone Bad. Those aren't great songs, but they're filler songs, and I sort of take them for what they are. But I think if you look at where Jump's positioned, yeah, that's getting skipped for me 10 out of 10 times. But what about you?
Yeah, well, I was coming at it just from a guitar perspective, not from a music perspective. So when I heard Ed's playing, at least my, 14-year-old mind, that it just wasn't, he had lost something. It wasn't as aggressive. And even though there's some great stuff on that album, I mean, there really is a lot of great stuff, and I was just too young to understand what he was doing. So I was disappointed on a couple levels. And then, of course, you have your Hut for Teacher that brought it back home to extreme guitar stuff. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, good point. I mean, there's enough of it. Even Girl Gone Bad is pretty shreddy or pretty guitar heavy, where it's like, okay, it sounds like it could have been an Ed solo album thing. I'm always amazed that Dave was able, I mean, Ed said this, but I was always amazed that Dave was able to squeeze melody lines into some of those tunes. Yeah, One Foot Out the Door, Girl Gone Bad. They're just tunes that sound almost like instrumentals, and Dave was able to make it work with some kind of vocal thing.